Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Science Dispatch podcast. Very excited to be with you. My name is Cameron English. That fine gentleman over there, Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck, what's going on?
Not a blessed thing. You know, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Spring has definitely sprung, and I'm well ahead on getting ready for Mother's Day. So that's always a good sign, since mother has been transferred from my real mother now to my wife.
It's actually Second Valentine's Day is the proper title for this holiday that's coming up.
Okay. Well, and plus, you have the problem that I used to have is, what are the children getting, Mom? Because
the children are getting her the number 2 and 3 things on her Amazon wish list. That's what they're getting her.
God bless them that they can do this already.
With their own money, too, and their own computers, it's really impressive stuff.
Screen time for them.
Which is always good. More screen time. Just kidding. That's a joke, everybody. I'm not saying that for real. All right, everyone calm down. But let's move on, Chuck. We've got an interesting story. You were the author of this, as you often are. You write a lot of great stuff that our readers appreciate. So,
well, thank you.
Here's a small trophy for you. Okay, this one is called Death in a Bun, Media's Carcinogenic Cautionary Tale About Hot Dogs. That's just like butter on a warm roll. I love that headline, Chuck. Let me read this summary and then break down what you're talking about here. So you say, nothing says spring as much as cherry blossoms or opening day in Major League Baseball. For many fans, attending a game in person to see that ceremonial first pitch is often followed by the ceremonial consumption of a hot dog. Not bothered by baseball's momentary reprieve from our day-to-day vicissitudes, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM, offers some warning stats and carcinogenic hand-wringing. All right, tell us about these wonderful vegan champions over at PCRM, Chuck. What are they concerned about?
They carried out a survey, because surveys are less expensive to do than actual science. And they found several things. They found that people that go to baseball games like having hot dogs.
Groundbreaking.
They also found that 70% of adults also know that a constant diet of hot dogs is probably bad for your health. And from that, they went on to ask them what I called the would-should conundrum, which was that 40% of the people that responded said that they would try a plant-based hot dog, whatever that might be. Though, interestingly enough, almost double that number said that the ballpark should provide them. So I'm not sure who the other people are that's going to be eating them, or maybe they'll just be having 2. I'm not sure how that works out. But that certainly speaks to the issue that while we have some degree of wanting to carry out righteous behavior, we think it's far more important that everybody do it rather than just us. In any case, so springing off that survey, the committee then jumped to nutritional science and what I would call mustard Mathmagic. And what they pulled up was an old study that showed that processed meats, hot dogs being amongst them, when grilled, will increase your risk of cancer. And there were some studies that were done that showed that 50 grams of processed red meat, like the amount in a hot dog, would increase your cancer risk by 18%. Again, all mathemagical. So they wanted to tell people that statistic, that for every hot dog that they were eating, they were increasing their risk of getting cancer. Now, just to be fair, the studies that looked at this problem with processed meat looked at grilled meat. And most hot dogs at ballparks are dirty water hot dogs. They don't have any of the chemicals from the Maillard reaction that develop because they're not grilled. So right away, we're off to the wrong start. And then I just couldn't help myself, but I went back to one of my favorite old studies that I talked about previously, where scientists had also tried to figure out how bad hot dogs were, but in this case, they figured out how many minutes of life you would lose. And for every one of those hot dogs that you ate, you were losing 15 minutes for eating the hot dog, and if God forbid you wash it down with a beer, that's another 15 minutes off your life. So I couldn't help myself. I had to talk about this really silly study and the fact that this is nutritionalism. And you know what? A lot of us like to eat because it tastes good and it's fun and it's satisfying. And as long as I'm not sucking down, as long as I'm not doing a kind of a Joey Chestnut every day with hot dogs, I don't think that one or two are going to cause me the kind of concern that this committee of physicians is trying to raise.
I do have some science-based questions for you, but if I can out of the gate just make a more personal, maybe philosophical observation. Some of my favorite memories from childhood are sitting in the Oakland Coliseum watching the A's play. And of course, eating hot dogs. And they used to have, and maybe other ballparks had this, but it was called a big dog. And it was literally a big hot dog in a sourdough roll. And it was the greatest treat. I didn't eat them every day because it was just at the ballpark.
Well, just to point out, there's no way you could eat a ballpark hot dog every day because you're not a millionaire. And
right.
The price of getting into the ballpark now,
yeah,
tickets are prohibitive. If you're going to go with your family, it's $200 before you get around to the hot dogs.
Yeah, very good point. So that by itself is going to exclude a huge percentage of the population. But nevertheless, my point is that in the early 2000s, I have all of these great memories of watching the A's become a great baseball team. This is the Moneyball era. They're losing their talent, but they're still kicking everyone's ass, and everyone's like, what's going on, right? And my point is, these are great memories, formative. I really enjoyed these, and hot dogs were a part of it. And frankly, if these results are true, I couldn't care less, right? Shave as many minutes off my life from the number of hot dogs. I just don't care. So that's my first point. I'd welcome your input on that because I know you're a physician and you deal with real people, or you did deal with real people.
I think that was really the bottom line of my comments on it, is that this nutritionalism seeks to wring any joy out of eating and turn it only into some kind of activity designed purely for sustenance and to feed ourselves. And that's not what food is. Food has so much more meaning to it than simply sustenance. I mean, that's why I ended the article as I did, saying, because sometimes joy is worth the nitrates. So it falls back on what you say.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Sometimes in science, we tend to stress these like really dorky, data-based arguments. Well, if you look at the p-value, it's like, I don't care. I don't care about the p-value or statistical significance. I like baseball and hot dogs. So just take your moralism or nutritionalism and pound sand. I don't care. But this is a science podcast. So if you would, if you would briefly explain.
There's not going to be any science here. You understand that. That's the difficulty. There's nutritionalism and there's scientism, which is facts masquerading as science, but there's no science here.
Well stated. I like AR-15s, rock music, diesel trucks, and hot dogs, and you're not taking any of them, right? That's my takeaway. Okay. They bring up this classic statistic that eating red meat, processed red meat, increases your colorectal cancer risk by 18%, I believe is the number. If you would, if it's not too complicated, explain the difference between relative and absolute risk, because this is deliberately the journalists probably don't know, but the people who are talking to the reporters, I think, allowed this misperception to go on, right? So my understanding is your risk for this particular disease, just like as a population, it's actually quite low. And then according to some of these epidemiological studies, if you add in regular intake of hot dogs, it goes up very slightly. But
right.
18% is not the 18% people are thinking about is what I'm
Right. So
at.
if let's say, I'm going to just try and make up some numbers, God save us here. So if there's an incidence of 1% across the population, the absolute risk, let's call the absolute risk 1%. If they then compare it to the hot dog eaters, and their risk is 1.2%, that's an 18% relative increase in the risk. And that sounds a lot better, 18%, than 0.2 increase. And so when you're writing a paper, or when you're asking for funding, or when you're trying to make a point, which number sounds better? There's a 0.2 increase if you eat the hot dog, or there's an 18% increase. They're both speaking to the same issue, but they're both getting at it. One saying relative risk, one saying absolute. And this is the use of relative risk to juice the numbers a little bit without losing the veracity of what they're saying. It is a very common technique that you see in journalism and in science articles.
The other part, and thank you for explaining that, that's really important for people to understand. The classic example I saw in one article where the researchers were trying to explain this is if you say, your risk goes from 1% to 2%, that's a doubling of risk, of course, but it's effectively null, right? That sort of thing. It's just, it's trickery. It's mustard. What did you call it? Mustard mathmagic? I love that.
Yes, mustard mathmagic. And going from 1% to 2% very frequently is just fluctuation in the noise, and is not the signal at all of what's going on with that. And again, even the studies where that 18% relative risk comes from also leaves out the fact that in addition to eating red meat, they were or were not exercising, they were or were not smoking, and on and on and on and on and on and on. So it's frustrating because, as I said, this idea of nutritionalism really hurts, I think, helping people understand what constitutes a healthy, nutritious diet. Feeling good about what you eat goes beyond simply making sure that you get the correct number of grams of protein and not too much salt and not too much sugar. There's the whole events that surround eating. I think there's a lot to be said for sitting down to dinner with your family. Mm-hmm. That makes a difference. There are foods that are cultural touchstones in everyone's culture. Mm. My people, it's chicken soup, right? We've shared chicken soup with the world.
And Hebrew nationals.
And Hebrew nationals, because we respond to a higher authority.
Good stuff. That is actually a really good point, though, right? Because we know that family dynamics are a significant factor in people's well-being as they age, So maybe even if hot dogs are not great for you, the effect is swamped by the benefit of having a meal with your family and your friends or your community. That's actually a really important point. One other thing that maybe you can comment on as we wrap up here, and I have to give credit to the low carbers on this one, like Gary Taubes and these kind of folks who are really adamant about defending saturated fat and protein. One of the points they'll make about these epidemiological papers is that processed red meat often is much more than red meat. So, if someone gets a burrito from the gas station, that counts as processed red meat. But what else are they eating, right? They're eating a lot of sugar. They're eating, whatever additives are in that product. And so it's quite likely, and we actually have some studies on this, that excess consumption of sugar and carbohydrate might actually be at least partially to blame for some of the effect that they're observing, and they're attributing it to red meat because that is the boogeyman that they're after. What are your thoughts?
Right. Oh, I think it depends on how you're focusing your study. That's the problem with nutritionalism. When you it's so reductive that you're looking at one specific element, as you don't look at everything else that comes in the food package. that you're having. So, it's there. The other thing I'd have to say is the timing of the article. It was just time for the beginning of baseball season, and I'm sure that we're going to have another follow-up study come 4th of July. Because that really gets back to that idea that it's not so much the hot dog on the 4th of July. It's the fact that you can be having the hot dog the same day your little small town is having its 4th of July parade, or that, some of your favorite as compared to unfavorite relatives are coming over for a barbecue. There's a whole, in the same way that when you look at processed red meat and you ignore the tortilla and the beans and the rice to come around it, focusing on the hot dog without mentioning the baseball game or without mentioning the picnic does a disservice, because it's more to that meal than simply the hot dog.
Very well said. Very well said. It's a great point. I appreciate it. Okay, so then the takeaway here, Dr. Dinnerstein, as a career surgeon and a physician, is it okay to have a hot dog once in a while? Am I going to keel over, or is it's all right?
No, it's all right. And what I would tell my patients before, so let's go with that thing that the hot dog and beer, that's 30 minutes off your life. Now, we'd like you to think that that's 30 minutes from now, but that's not the case. It's usually the 30 minutes at the end of life, and as I was always tell the patients, they're going to be crappy minutes anyway. You may be better off without those minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll be sitting in your chair in a diaper staring out the window just hoping the end comes. Yeah. As we wrap up here, there was another study recently where they said that there are certain genes associated with people's love of music. And then they went on to speculate, and they would say, there's evolutionary roots and music brings people together, and so they're more efficient when they go hunting. And my takeaway was like, who cares, right? Metallica kicks ass. That's why I listen to music, right? That's why I listen to music when I work out or when I'm whatever mood I'm in. Let's just leave it at that. Let's stop trying to analyze everything to death, because it's just driving people nuts.
Fair enough. Though I would say that there is social bonding that comes from music because of the rhythmicity of it. That's good to note.
Yes, yeah, of course, there is. I think what I'm getting at is there's this sort of scientific desire. We just have to mechanize and deconstruct everything. It's like, just stop, guys. Right? Hot dogs are good. Rock music's good. Let's all just have a nice summer. That's my takeaway.
Fair enough. There's nothing wrong with a little awe and mystery.
There you go. I think G.K. Chesterton had it right when he talked about that. Okay, once again, the article is called Death in a Bun, Media's Carcinogenic Cautionary Tale about Hot Dogs, Great article. This is on acsh.org. If you go to the site, click the subscribe tab, punch in your email address, we'll send you these stories, including this one that Chuck wrote, right to your inbox. The ones that you read are typically the ones that we talk about. And follow us on social. It's at acsh.org. I'm at CamJEnglish. Send us an email. We'll get it to Chuck if you have questions for him. And as always, thank you for joining us. We will see you next time.